Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. On behalf of the Environmental Finance Center Network, welcome to the webinar today focused on leveraging regional development organizations to support small water systems. During the webinar today, everyone will be kept on mute to ensure audio quality. If you have a question, please type it into the GoToWebinar question dialog box at any time throughout the session for your question to be queued and asked to our presenters. We will be posting the presentation as well as a video recording on our website. You can reach that website in the bottom left-hand corner URL. That's www.efcnetwork.org. You will also be receiving a follow-up email that includes links to all of the follow-up materials and any information that you may need. Registered attendees can receive a certificate of attendance for participating in this webinar today. This webinar has not been submitted to licensing agencies for pre-approval of continuing education credits. We will provide a certificate of attendance as a courtesy for self-submittal purposes. It can take up to 30 days to send out certificates, and you must attend this entire webinar to receive one. In order for us to count your attendance, you also must have joined this webinar using the unique join link that was emailed to you when you registered. If you have any questions about this, you can email us at smallsystems@syr.edu. And for just a little bit about us here in the Environmental Finance Center Network, our program provides training and technical assistance to small public water systems in all U.S. states and territories to help local water systems achieve their goals and stay in compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act. And here you can see the various centers that make up the Environmental Finance Center Network. You can see that we have partner organizations spread across the entire country for this year's programming. We all work together to create solutions for difficult how-to-pay issues of environmental protection and improvement. So on that note, to jump right in for the webinar today, I would like to introduce our panel of speakers. With us today, we have Liz Cody, Community Development Specialist at the Southeast Nebraska Development District, Jean Cruz Klein, Regional Planning Director of the Lumber River Council of Governments in North Carolina, and Brett Schwartz, Associate Director of the NATO Research Foundation located in Washington, D.C. So I welcome the panel and I pass everything over to Brett to kick us off.
All right, well, thank you so much, Savannah, and hello, everyone. I'm Brett Schwartz, Associate Director at the NATO Research Foundation. Really glad to be a part of today's presentation. This is the third webinar we've organized as part of the Smart Management for Small Water Systems program, featuring how regional development organizations are assisting small water systems throughout their regions. So as a quick background, NATO is the National Association of Development Organizations based in Washington, D.C. It's a membership association of regional development organizations all across the country that serve primarily smaller metropolitan and rural regions. So we provide training and advocate on Capitol Hill for programs of importance to regional organizations, including the Economic Development Administration, planning grants, HUD CDBG funding, USDA programs, federal highway programs, brownfields, and much more. Now, I'm part of the NATO Research Foundation, which is the nonprofit research arm of NATO. We're federally funded through grants to organize trainings and events, conduct research, and share best practices on a host of regional planning, economic development, and transportation issues. So we're really happy to have been a part of the Smart Management for Small Water Systems program for the past 3 years now, and partner with the Environmental Finance Center Network on this really critical work that impacts all of you on the call today. So next slide, please. So we use the general term Regional Development Organization, or RDO, to describe our members. And depending on what part of the country you are in, these organizations may go by different names, as you see listed up on the screen, such as councils of governments, economic development districts, area development districts, and much more. But no matter what they're called in your state, these are all public-based entities that play an invaluable role in fostering intergovernmental collaboration among federal, state, and local officials. So RDOs provide various types of support to their members, communities in a host of service areas. As you hear today, their diverse portfolio may include promoting place-based strategies in the areas of planning, housing, transportation, infrastructure, workforce development, social services, and other sectors. And of course, today we'll be talking more about how this multidisciplinary focus is an asset when addressing water infrastructure issues as well. So right now I want to launch a quick poll for those of you who are on the call today to see how many of you have engaged with your respective RDOs as part of your work. So let me try to pull this up quickly. So take a moment or two. It's probably the easiest thing you'll have to do all day here. Have you engaged with the regional development organization that serves your area? Yes, no, or not sure. And I'll keep that open for 3, 2, 1, and I'm going to close the poll and share these results. Great. So it looks like almost 2/3 of you have engaged with your RDO. It's great to hear. Almost 30% have not, and a few others are not sure. So great. So we've got a really strong mix here on the call today. So we'll go to the next slide. Perfect. Great. So, one of the core goals, especially for those of you who have worked with RDOs know this, is really to improve resilience of the regions and communities that they're a part of. And they do this in a variety of ways through planning, project implementation, and coalition building. So we've embraced a really broad and inclusive definition of resilience as the ability of a region or community to anticipate, withstand, and bounce back from any type of shock, disruption, or stress that it may face. So this, of course, includes weather-related disasters, hazards, and the impacts of a changing climate, but also man-made economic shocks, such as the closure of a region's large employer or military base, the decline of important industry, and changes in the workforce and the impacts of automation. And of course, in this era of COVID-19, resilience planning should be a part of any economic recovery strategy. And we think the power of this definition is that it broadens attentions away from a purely emergency-focused response, how to deal with the immediate impact of a disruptive event, to really planning and organizing in advance and rebuilding afterwards with a coherent framework. So next slide. So during today's webinar, you'll hear how 2 RDOs in North Carolina and Nebraska are working with local municipalities to support water and wastewater systems, and in turn are making their regions more resilient. You'll hear how these organizations work with small local municipalities on asset inventory for water systems infrastructure, collaborate on projects that enhance economic development, how they coordinate with federal partners, and much more. But before I introduce our speakers, I just want to share some brief points about the variety of ways that RDOs can support their region's water systems. And this is specifically for those on the call today who maybe have not yet engaged with their RDOs, kind of see what type of work they can support you with. This work is often very much behind the scenes and out of the limelight, and includes facilitating access to funding, data collection and mapping, supporting regionalization, and promoting broader economic development. So the most common way RDOs support local water systems is by helping counties and communities access funding through grant writing, providing administrative assistance, and leading capacity building efforts. RDO staff can pursue funding from a mix of sources and provide guidance and oversight from initial grant preparation through final project closeout. So in addition to state-specific funding streams, popular federal funding sources include the US EPA Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, HUD Community Development Block Grants, USDA Rural Development Support, EDA Public Works, and grants from federal state commissions such as the Appalachian Regional Commission and the Delta Regional Authority. Now, RDOs also serve as repositories for data, statistics, and other key information about the regions they serve. So this can include information about demographics, economic development, land use, watersheds, commuter flows, and much more. And this knowledge can really support small towns and cities in making informed decisions about infrastructure planning and pursue future investments in a smart way. Also, given their broad scope of work and array of partners, RDOs bring a regional focus to addressing water system planning and infrastructure. With their emphasis on collaboration, RDOs can initiate projects and infrastructure improvements that promote efficiency, keep costs down for consumers, improve water quality, and break down barriers between municipalities in pursuit of funding opportunities. And finally, we all know that without well-functioning and cost-effective utilities, economic development opportunities and business expansion prospects are severely limited for towns and cities. So water systems infrastructure and upgrades are therefore often part of larger economic development projects supported by RDOs and their key partners. And these can include very localized site-specific projects or much larger regional efforts to support an industry cluster. So next slide. So if you're interested in learning more about how RDOs support water systems after this webinar, make sure to check out a blog post that we've posted up on our website, as well as the 2 previous webinars that we hosted that are archived at the EFCN website as well. And next slide. So please hope you can get in touch afterwards if you have any specific questions about regional development organizations or our work in general at NATO and the NATO Research Foundation. Again, if you already aren't working with your local RDO, really encourage you to do so and hope you'll understand why after hearing from our presenters today. If you're unsure which RDO serves your region, please get in touch and I can certainly connect you with staff there. So next slide. And so with that, I'd like to introduce our speakers today, who will share with you some of the important work that they're doing in their regions to support water systems and infrastructure. You'll hear how these efforts are improving quality of life, protecting public health, generating economic development opportunities, and much more in their local communities. So first, we'll be hearing from Liz Cody, who's the Community Development Specialist at the Southeast Nebraska Development District. Liz will showcase examples from 2 small communities in her region that demonstrate the intersection of water infrastructure with economic development and improved quality of life, as well as overall best practices for this work. Then we'll hear from Jean Cruz Klein, who is the Regional Planning Director at the Lumber River Council of Governments in North Carolina. Jean will dive into how her organization supported a variety of asset management projects in communities across her region, lessons learned from these experiences, and we'll also share some resources that are available to assist communities with these efforts. So we'll hear our 2 presentations first and then do Q&A at the end with both of our speakers, but feel free to type in any of the questions and thoughts you have throughout into the question box function that Savannah mentioned earlier. We'll collect those and get to those at the end. So once again, thanks so much for joining us. Looking forward to our time together. And with that, I'll turn things over to Liz for her presentation.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Brett and Savannah. Thank you to the NATO and Environmental Finance Center for hosting today's talk, and thank you all for joining. My name is Liz Cody, and I'm speaking to you on behalf of Southeast Nebraska Development District. I want to talk to you about my work with rural water systems and community development in our area. I'm going to show a few examples and describe some of the goals that we are working towards. So yeah, let's go to the next slide. All right, so our state slogan in Nebraska is, honestly, it's not for everyone. And I think this picture of my truck this morning fits that slogan really well. Looking at attendance, I saw nearly every 50 states, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, Canadian provinces, and even guests from Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Australia. So wherever you're joining from, I hope it's someplace warm. You're all welcome to visit Nebraska, but we understand it's not for everyone. I'd still encourage you to come and see for yourself. In the next slide, I'll tell you about what I do here in Nebraska when I'm not shoveling snow. As a community development specialist, I support rural governments in their pursuit of water and wastewater infrastructure, as well as public works, downtown revitalization, tourism development, regional planning, and our organization also provides support for housing rehabilitation and workforce housing, business loans, and even disaster recovery. The next slide, I'll tell you a bit about our region. So Southeast Nebraska Development District covers a 15-county area that's 8,500 square miles, including 150 jurisdictions that range in size from 30 residents to a city of over 8,000. In our region, agriculture is hugely important to our economy and our culture, but many of our communities also lie in close proximity to metropolitan areas such as Lincoln and Omaha, as well as along Interstate 80, a major shipping route, and along Missouri River, also a major shipping route. Our region borders eastern Iowa, northern Kansas, and northeastern Missouri. Now, according to the US Census Bureau, our region's total population has remained stable since 2000, just under 180,000 people. However, this stability masks 2 opposing trends. Community growth and prosperity is occurring near large metropolitans and along established trade routes, while other communities are in decline with an aging population and economic distress. So some communities are getting younger and more diverse. Other communities are struggling to take care of their aging infrastructure and aging population. At Send, we of course provide support for both kinds of community, and today I'm going to share some insight into how we've helped both large and small communities. The next slide is about Morse Bluff. So Morse Bluff is a perfect example of a large-scale infrastructure project taking place in a very small community with a population of only 128 people. However, Morse Bluff is hopeful that as Nebraskans continue to take up residence in Saunders County in order to enjoy the commute to nearby Omaha, Lincoln, and Fremont, that there will be growth on the horizon. Now, in 2020, Morse Bluff completed a total overhaul of their water infrastructure. This was over $1 million in improvements. They have a new water tank. They drilled a new well, they updated their water pump and pump house, they installed new water mains and radio read water meters for all their residents. So on the slide, you can see that there's a new water tank rising up above that much smaller, older tank. This entire process took about 5 years from initial study to final construction. Planning was, of course, the first step, and in Nebraska, preliminary engineering reports are required in order to submit a request to our state's Water and Wastewater Advisory Council for funding. The next slide, I'll talk about the role an RDO can play in supporting communities with limited resources. So this preliminary engineering report is often a daunting financial obstacle for a small community. In this case, Morse Bluff was able to apply for a USDA surge grant. They actually did this with the help of their village engineer, JEO Consulting. On the basis of that report, they were then able to seek funding for a complete overhaul of their aging water system. Now, at the time, they requested over $1 million in both USDA rural development funds and CDBG block grant funds. That combination of funds was needed to make the project attainable for the residents of Morse Bluff. At that point, it was really easy for Send. We didn't participate in the development of that application. Their engineer helped them, and we were simply contacted to administer CDBG funds after the grant had been awarded. This was because village staff was very small, and they needed our help to make sure the project would move quickly. We held monthly planning meetings between the village clerk, engineer, contractors, as well as the USDA and myself, the CDBG administrator. Now, thanks to these funds, that covered the initial project expense, and the remainder of the loan is repayable at a very low interest rate of 1.125%. So by using a combination of USDA and CDBG funds, Morse Bluff mitigated the need to dedicate really any local dollars towards the planning or construction of that major infrastructure project. Now, while that looks like a best case scenario for a small community, it does leave Morse Bluff with a considerable loan repayment. And it solved their critical need for drinking water, but it didn't leverage any other forms of economic development that could provide value-added outcomes, improving housing or business initiatives that could generate increased property taxes or sales tax to help Morse Bluff pay for their new water system. So in the next slide, we'll discuss an even better best case scenario in the community of York, Nebraska. Now, the hot air balloon water tower in York is a local landmark. It's also an example of their unique ability to see water infrastructure as more than just infrastructure. Their creativity and the optimism behind it has helped York successfully leverage multiple economic development initiatives at the same time. And it put them on the map in 2019 as one of only 2 Nebraska communities to win a NATO Impact Award. York was able to succeed thanks to strong planning. They focused on several clearly defined priority problems, and they leveraged local resources to develop coordinated solutions so that they could demonstrate their success across multiple outcomes. In the next 4 slides, I'll talk about how York became successful. First, they started strong on planning. To give credit where it's due, I want to look back to 2013 when Mitch Dote was hired by the City of York as their Public Works Director. In that role, he created an asset management position to utilize GIS tools and assess York's need for water and other infrastructure. So by 2017, York was breaking ground on a new water treatment facility and had additional projects such as their downtown water main on the horizon. Now, in 2016, York County Development Corporation and the City of York had assisted with a countywide housing study, which was going to measure the impact of previous and ongoing housing programs that Send had helped with and serve as the basis for future housing initiatives. During that same time frame, the City of York was working with Send to pursue multiple rounds of funding for comprehensive development and downtown revitalization to focus on the needs of their aging downtown core. Also along the way, community surveys helped determine which priority projects were going to have the strongest basis of community support, and local groups were able to leverage that support to be very effective at the local level. So overall, robust planning allowed multiple projects to emerge from different sectors quickly and to gain traction. Now, some communities may prefer to solve problems one at a time, but as the next slide shows, pursuing multiple priorities at the same time can be a key to developing coordinated solutions. So in 2018, downtown York was plagued by 100-plus-year-old water mains that occupied roughly 20 city blocks. This was creating a public nuisance, shut-off valves no longer worked or didn't exist, and breaks were occurring with increasing frequency. During those repairs, entire city blocks would be affected, and this would cut off water to downtown residents and businesses, including restaurants, offices, and even hair salons. So York was also struggling with a shortage of quality housing. They had dilapidated housing that sat unsold and unoccupied in the downtown area, and they had commercial buildings that needed updated too. This investment was a growing problem, and business owners and homeowners were needed to help turn the tide. So economic development initiatives were also needed to boost sales tax and property values. But the problem was how to fund these programs, because in 2018, York's mayor proposed an unexpected budget cut to the tune of $1 million. And this unpopular announcement also called for drastic measures such as freezing hiring, wages, capital expenditures, and even doubling the local tax levy. So leveraging water infrastructure alongside other state-funded initiatives was going to provide direct support to local property owners while avoiding costly capital expenditures by the city of York. In pursuing that route, York set off a cascade of positive change for their community. I'll go into this in the next slide. York's multi-project effort to improve their downtown included a water main project, a residential housing project, and a multi-phase commercial rehabilitation project. The water main project involved replacing 18 city blocks. They completed this in one-block phases each month in order to minimize the impact to traffic flow. And for businesses, shut-off times were limited to about an hour or less. Any lead lines they encountered were replaced. Now, the Purchase, Rehab, Resale housing program supported residential housing in the downtown area through the acquisition, rehabilitation, and resale of single-family homes in 3 LMI census block groups that overlapped with the downtown. In 2018, York requested over $500,000 in CDBG block grant funds to continue that project, but city officials and grant administrators were very concerned that their funding was going to be cut unless York could come up with suitable local leverage that was needed to replace other city-led projects that had been canceled due to budget concerns. So for this reason, the timing of this project with the water main project was absolutely a happy accident, but also a critical coincidence. It was needed in order for York to show that it was providing matching funds and community leverage as required by block grant for renewing their PRR program funding. Now, in 2018, York also was beginning their downtown revitalization, facade improvement, and commercial rehab program. That program provided block grant funds to assist with improvements of 10 buildings in downtown York, and it stimulated private investment of over $130,000. By focusing on projects that restored, renovated, replaced, or reconstructed facades, business owners were given the tools to update and refresh their businesses. On the next slide, I will discuss our key partners. So each of these separate projects had a unique array of partners that worked with different members at SEND. The Public Works Director, Mitch Doak, coordinated the planning, funding, and implementation of the water main project. Now, both York County Development Corporation and the York Chamber of Commerce were instrumental in efficiently implementing York's Purchase, Rehab, Resale housing program and their commercial downtown rehabilitation program. These projects all owe much of their success to my predecessors at SEND, including Betsy Goodman and Trey Ertmer, who served as program administrators for these projects, as well as to our director, Tom Bliss. He, along with our housing manager, Jim Worrelman, helped establish key partnerships within York and ensured that local initiatives would be carried out in accordance with program guidelines and our regional sets. Because these projects occurred simultaneously, they encompassed multiple metrics of success. So when the water main project came back under budget, for example, they were granted an additional 6 blocks to be added to the project in 2020, totaling 24 blocks completed. Now the downtown can say that it has new water mains, new service lines, improved capacity and pressure, and much more fire hydrants for community safety. There's also no more lead lines in downtown York. At the same time, an initial stock of 6 homes were rehabilitated for York residents, and the program actually has sustainable income for revitalizing additional homes within the city's core. An additional home has been completed, and another project has already been identified, which would bring this total up to 8. Because this program was established so that program income would be self-sustaining, as these funds are returned to the program, the number of homes improved will continue to grow over time. In 2019, SEND was actually awarded the NATO Impact Award for this PRR program and its innovative use of water infrastructure for leverage. And as awareness and support for the program grew within the community, the city was even able to expand the footprint of the program. Now it's acting outside of the original census tracts and can provide additional resources to homeowners citywide. While the downtown revitalization efforts were not part of the funding leverage towards housing rehab or water improvements, they definitely benefited from ongoing capital improvements. The synergy of investments in downtown York helped generate robust interest in revitalization. So by now, over 21 local businesses have participated, and York has received multiple rounds of implementation funds totaling well over $1 million. York could not have predicted that the 2020 global pandemic would impact their downtown. However, it appears that with the recent influx of funding, they effectively immunized local businesses against a dramatic impact of the pandemic, which is losing hope. With so many improvements in rapid succession, these projects helped foster a mindset of creativity, optimism, and even abundance amongst York's residents, and has allowed both new and longstanding businesses and homeowners to remain optimistic about their future and committed to helping one another succeed. So SEND played some key roles at almost every step in the development pipeline in York. Early on, we were part of the CDBG funding, development, and administration for comprehensive development planning. We also assisted York with pursuing their housing study update, and SEND helped establish the PRR program, leveraging experience we'd gained from 2 previous successful owner-occupied programs from 2011 and 2014. We worked closely with the city and local partners to develop our programs, and we advocated them to state funding agencies when we needed to leverage things like the water main in order to support this housing rehabilitation project. We also provided support directly in the form of grant development and administration for the downtown revitalization planning and their multiple rounds of implementation funds. And throughout the entire process, we worked directly with city staff, local economic developers, project engineers, property owners, homeowners, and business owners to ensure that all parties were involved in the successful outcomes of each project. Now, in other communities like Morse Bluff, staffing and budget limitations prevent a community from adopting this kind of coordinated approach as seen in York. So SEND has to routinely adapt its role to meet the needs of individual communities, both small and large. In the next slide, I'll discuss some of these challenges. From the perspective of a small community, a major hurdle is planning. Many communities don't have the funds for this, and preliminary engineering is required for funding assistance from the state. Now, this used to be an eligible category for block grant funds in Nebraska, but the state has moved away from this standard somewhat, and now planning funds are available only in limited circumstances. So without these funds, it can be difficult to move forward in identifying potential projects and seeking funding. Now, for larger communities, planning may not be an issue. However, it's still important because with multiple project timelines, logistical coordination, staffing, and even funding cycles can all affect the project's outcome. In some cases, SEND may not hear about a particular water infrastructure project until we're being asked to provide grant administration. Now, at that point, we're happy to do so, but that makes it very difficult to leverage any additional funds from different projects because of specific federal regulations regarding procurement and labor, as well as just the timelines involved. From the perspective of funding agencies, turnover at the community level or among grant administrators at SEND results in gaps in experience and oversight that can have an impact on multi-year projects. So unexpected delays in project completion can often result in projects being marked as higher risk by funding agencies. Now, from the perspective of SEND, we carefully monitor changes in the funding landscape for our region. We look at community eligibility for block grant funds over time, and we examine funding agency program requirements that may be changing. But it can still be really difficult to get a clear picture of our regional need for water and wastewater infrastructure because we have no central database of state water records, and communities may or may not be able to provide good documentation of their existing infrastructure, its age or condition. Another challenge we all face is climate change. Increasingly in Nebraska, water infrastructure needs have been the result of unexpected natural disasters. The 2019 floods resulted in damage to many local lagoons and wastewater treatment systems or critical water infrastructure. In these cases, SEND has worked closely with Nebraska's Department of Economic Development and their emergency management, NEMA, to pursue solutions to urgent threats and community safety and health. So in the future, SEND is going to continue to provide individualized support to communities, both large and small. We're also actively working with the University of Nebraska to improve our regional asset management strategy, utilizing surveys and GIS tools to build a more robust picture of our future water infrastructure needs and both our community and regional vulnerability. In developing these tools, we hope to add value to member communities and open the door to collaborations with other regional partners such as local natural resource districts, Midwest Assistance Project, or the Nebraska Water Center. As we refine this approach and find new partnerships, we hope to identify new projects that will provide an even regional scale and impact. And as always, we're going to remain focused on coordinating our efforts with our regional SEDs and updating them as needed. So to learn more about our work in Morse Bluff, York, our other communities, or to see what our comprehensive economic development strategy looks like, you're welcome to check these out in the slides. You can click the links for more information. And as one of our 8 development districts, I really hope that you look for us online at www.send.org. I'm happy to discuss anything we've talked about today, and thank you so much for joining us.
All right, Liz, thank you so much for that presentation. That York example is phenomenal. Really appreciate you showing that, and it really just shows the kind of the interconnection of these issues, that none of this work happens in a silo. So thanks for showing that. I'm really excited to hear that there's sustainability and continuing progress on that. So looking forward to hearing more during the Q&A section with you as well. And just a reminder to everyone on the call to type in your questions, both for Liz and Jean, and we'll get to those at the end. So Liz, thanks again. And with that, we'll turn things over to Jean. We'll take a flight over to North Carolina and the Lumber River Council of Governments. And Jean will talk about a variety of work that their organization is doing, but in particular, the asset management projects. So Jean, take it away.
Okay. Thank you, Brett. And thank you, Savannah, for your help on this. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to take you through how we got started as a cog in asset management for water and wastewater systems. I think, we've been at it for 11 years now, and we've got some pretty good lessons learned that I think might be useful to you. Next slide, please. So first, greetings from North Carolina. If you haven't been here, please come visit. It's a beautiful state, stretches from the mountains to the coast. It's a diverse state. North Carolina is often called a state of small cities, and the reason for that is that we had quite a group of mid-sized small cities develop in the state, particularly in the Piedmont region. And the importance of city structure and county structure for water and wastewater management and the development of that has been very important in the state. Next slide. Okay. I work with the Lumber River Council of Governments, which is a COG. That's what we call them here in North Carolina. There are 17 of them. Our COG is in southeastern North Carolina. It's not on the coast and doesn't include any coastal counties. We're kind of in an interior, just interior of those coastal counties. Our purpose is very similar to what Brett has already described for you and what Savannah was indicating. When our board formed our organization, there were several federal line programs that were needing administration. And so we, like other COGs in the North Carolina group, do administer aging funds and workforce development funds. But beyond that, our board of directors decided that they would sit down and strategically decide from time to time where the best investment of time and resources for this COG was based on what the issues were with the member governments. So our community and economic services staff, which I am the head of, we are the group inside the organization that works directly with local governments. We do planning and zoning, water and wastewater planning. We have done a significant amount of work on water resources planning. And then we do general grant writing and administration. Next slide, please. This is a map of the COG region. It's 5 counties: Richmond, Hope, Scotland, Robeson, and Bladen. And then in that map on the right, you can see the 17 regions in North Carolina. We are region N in the dark green. Next slide. So what about the units of government that are located in our region? With few exceptions, the counties and the towns that we work with struggle economically, and there are a variety of reasons for that. The typical problems are high rates of poverty, low median household income, and experience with population loss. That recently has been a significant challenge for us. One of the reasons for that is because we are also, as we are in North Carolina, we have been subject to a number of natural disasters. We have had a litany of hurricanes that were massive storms that have severely impacted the region and have, as we're finding now, and we're anxious to see what the census numbers put forward, we believe that there's been some significant population loss. People that were displaced as a result of the storms and just could never find a place to relocate and therefore left. We have a large number of very small towns in this region, and very small, from the EPA definition is 3,300 customers or fewer. Our small towns are 33,000 and less, but most of them own and operate their own drinking water and wastewater systems. Many of these systems, based on the work that we do with planning and collection of data and census analysis, are operating in the red on their water and wastewater systems. They are living on fund balances that were accumulated long ago and socked away based on the way that the government of the towns thought was the best thing to do to protect for the future. North Carolina has also experienced a tremendous amount of job loss. We shed manufacturing jobs by the hundreds of thousands. And so we are an interesting study, I think, in that we've got a lot of small towns that once were very viable and very, very successful and provided a good quality of life, that now are struggling with the results of natural disasters and the economic downturn, and trying to figure out, what is their path forward. So, next slide. So, as the staff, and our concern about the region and our work with our communities, we began to try to figure out about, again, 11 years ago, what would be one of the things that we could do, that we could wrap our arms around, and a service that we could provide that would help these, particularly the small units of government, understand what they had in terms of assets for drinking water and wastewater, understand a little bit more about how those link together financially, and help them to chart a path forward. Again, in working with the North Carolina Department of State Treasurer, we have held a number of workshops for these communities to come, town clerks, managers, elected officials, to sit and talk about financial management in small towns, and consistently, both from the local perspective and from the state's perspective. The one dynamic when it starts to occur that will pull a town down faster than anything else is the challenge in managing your infrastructure. Because if you can't stay ahead of the costs and you can't maintain it, there's not a promising future ahead. So why did we think asset management would be useful? Well, first, we knew by talking with folks that most did not have a complete inventory of physical assets, and that alone would be useful. Second, in terms of looking at what asset management is, having each asset assessed for condition, systems would then have much better information to gauge decisions on what, maintenance, what are our absolute critical maintenance priorities this budget year, for instance. What are we going to repair? What are we going to replace? What's on its last leg and band-aided to the nth degree and has got to go? Or what can we, eke out another year in and replace in the future years? And we also thought that this information would be useful in developing projects and plans for funding. To make whatever upgrades were called for, improvements that were indicated, and also to develop maintenance plans. That was one thing that was very, very much needed. Next slide, please. I think, this picture, if for those of you that are involved in public works, this is like the icky picture, because it's a night repair and it's an emergency night repair, and it's the kind of situation that you never want to be in. I've been a town manager before, and I can remember standing on the side of a highway, digging down to try and find a water line that had burst. And when they finally hit it, the whole hole flooded. And, all you're doing with emergency night repairs is throwing tons of money into a situation that, had it been handled before, had it been identified, a plan set out for managing it, and then that plan pursued by the elected officials, you could have cost controlled better than you do in an emergency repair. And that little guy at the bottom of the slide, throwing away dollars, is what I think of when I think of emergency night repair. Next slide, please. I think finally, to us, asset management was the cornerstone in building a sustainable economic future for the towns. Because so many of the jurisdictions that we worked with were having financial challenges in their water and wastewater systems. And this was pulling on the financial stability of the unit. that was our, that was our primary ticket in, but there's so many other benefits of doing asset management and so many other connections that can be made. And this is a slide that gives you samples of some. This is certainly not all, but to be a sustainable system is important. You've taken care of, or at least looked at and have a plan for your financial viability. You've looked at your operation. You know how resilient you are or are not. You've looked at your infrastructure from a consistency and a stability perspective. Do I have the infrastructure I need in this town to survive for the next 20 years, say, or not? And if not, what are we going to do? Adequacy of water resources is something that's extremely important, and it's becoming more important here in North Carolina as our population increases and the demand for what we have goes up. Sustainability also, the quality of the product delivered is very important. Sustainability determines or can influence how you relate to your customers. Are you communicating with your customers about what you're doing, what challenges you're facing? How honest are you being with the folks that you serve about what the conditions are and what the plans are? And then employee development. One of the things we found when we went in to most of these small towns is that there had been a public works director there for years. Excuse me. And most of the knowledge about that system was sitting in that person's head. So getting that information out of that person's head and onto paper and into some piece of software, whatever you selected, was really important in terms of continuity. Elected officials play an incredible role in the development of sustainable towns, sustainable systems, because elected officials are the decision makers. It's the role of the staff to make sure that you're communicating what the situation is with your infrastructure clearly and often. But in the end, it's the decision of your elected leaders, and having those folks educated and understanding how important infrastructure is to a viable future is important. Okay, next slide. So in our asset management program, like I said, we started 11 years ago, and when we started, there weren't a lot of resources available. We started scratching around for a database system that was affordable or free, because our intention was not to do this and keep it, but to assist with doing the asset management work and then making it available to the local government units to use themselves. And so we knew that we couldn't, there are several very nice, very high-end asset management pieces of software out there that are incredible. But we knew that that wasn't practical for what we were trying to do. And so we came across EPA's CUPS program, and that's what we decided to use. And in addition to CUPS, we decided to invest in some GIS technology. And we used Esri, which I think probably most jurisdictions, I think government and private sector are using an Esri product. But we married those two. And that's been a good marriage. Next slide, please. So this is the starter sheet, the homepage for the CUPS program. This is on the EPA website. And at the time that we were doing it, you would log on to the EPA website and download CUPS. And basically what CUPS is and why we decided to use it through these years is that it's a database management program. And it has certain algorithms built into it so that when you collect all your information for your asset management plan and you key it into this, then those algorithms run and then you get a series of tables. CUPS also did a draft of an asset management plan itself. We didn't find that very usable. It didn't contain all the information that we wanted to have in one of our asset management plans when they were done. So we tend to use CUPS for the database management piece. Next slide. On our GIS, this is where we started. This is a water system in a small town. There's obviously a legend that goes with this on a larger map, but pretty simple. North Carolina has a really great GIS inventory. They have a whole group of folks dedicated to GIS. And we used the orthos, the most recently available orthos, as our backdrops. Next slide, please. And this is where we are today. We're a little bit more sophisticated. A lot of time's gone by. We've learned from experience, but it's been good experience. And so now on this GIS system, we are using a downloadable ARC reader program. And so we give the local government the ARC reader program, and we give them all of their maps. We give them their maps as PDFs purposefully so that they can print them. We have a format set up so that they can print them, but they can't mess them up. They can't make entries directly on the map. We have another way of doing that, and periodically we'll go back to those systems and collect all of those changes and updates and then reset the program. Next slide, please. So this is just a sample of manual data collection, and this is what I still do. It is then I enter this information, but it's still a matter of meeting with the public records folks. They become our best friends, and we hope we become their best friends. We exchange information back and forth for months, and then finally settle on what we think are the best entries, and then I'll enter that information and run draft reports. Next slide, please. Once those one of the things in those draft reports that's really very important for asset management, and if there's, I don't know, maybe a single takeaway from asset management for local elected officials, this may be it. The algorithms in the database management software that you choose, whatever that might be, are going to weigh the entries and sort through them. And then they will assign a criticality rating to each asset. And that criticality rating is important from this perspective. If there are some assets that we collect information on that are not as important as others to managing, let's say, the water system effectively and efficiently. And so out of the group that is important to that management, then all of those assets are ranked. And so you get a ranked priority listing of, okay, when I look across all of my water assets, what are the ones that are essential to the adequate functioning of this system, to meeting our regulatory compliance requirements? Well, here's the list. And then the other sort that is done is, what risk is that asset in currently, based on its age and the condition assessment, so that you can link those two and come forward with a list of the assets for your drinking water or wastewater system that you'd better be paying attention to. Next slide, please. When we have had funds available, we've supplemented our work with, on the sewer side, with flow monitoring and CCTV. On the drinking water side, we've supplemented with hydraulic analysis done by, obviously, by a professional engineer, and water audits. And those feed such good information into an asset management plan. These are just some examples of still shots from the video on CCTV, and I'm sure for those of you that are familiar with systems, this is typical stuff, I think. In North Carolina, we do have a lot of clay pipes still. Clay was the pipe of choice for small towns, I think, because it was easy access to it and it was relatively cheap. So we have a lot of vitreous clay in our sewer systems. And then on the water side, we got a lot of concrete. Okay, next slide. And these are just some more samples of what we found on CCTV. That one on the left is pretty dramatic. That's a complete collapse of the pipe. Okay, next slide. So in the time that we've been working on this, some observations, and I've limited these to water systems, since that's kind of the purpose of this webinar series, is on small water systems. So in our 5-county region, based on the asset management work that we have done, and we have completed asset management projects for almost every one of our jurisdictions by now. And if they haven't worked with us, they've worked with consulting engineers in the state. So fortunately, our municipalities, which are also our system owners and operators, are pretty well covered now with asset management plans. So what have we found? In terms of supply, pretty much every one of the systems that we looked at, even the smallest ones, have some available capacity. So we didn't come across any system that was, at a critical stage and had to make an immediate investment in alternative supply. Our systems, like many of those around the country, are groundwater based. We have very few surface water systems in our region. And so that means that they're dependent on the groundwater supply, which is why we've been involved in water supply planning, groundwater. What we found about wells is that most of them have been in service well beyond their useful life periods, well beyond. And because of the ground that we have here in the region, which is sandy soil, it's not unusual for casings to shift. And so we've come across, in every system, the fact that the wells are old. I think the one that we found in service longest was about 65 years, and it was still active and still the primary well that the town relied on. The distribution systems for the central areas, so the the area that was developed first, which is typically the existing downtown, is the oldest part of the system. There are very few valves, and if there are any valves, most are not operational. Very few systems, although this is beginning to change, have undertaken meter replacement programs. And that is probably, if you can do it, that is probably one of the wisest investments that a water system can make, or a town can make, because as you know, if you have inaccurately reading meters, that affects not only your water billing, but it affects your sewer billing, because your sewer billing is indexed off your water billing. We found water loss in every system without fail, which is what you would expect to find. Some, though, were really high. The highest that we've come across is 33%. And water loss is important because it costs you. You know, you pay to treat the drinking water and then distribute it. And if you are not receiving a revenue in return for that, then you're just digging yourself a hole. Our asbestos concrete lines are prevalent, and many of them are undersized, and we have a ton of galvanized lines, which I'm sure most people do. Few systems have gone so far on water to define upgrade projects, but not as many as on the wastewater side. Okay, next slide. So here are some samples of meters and condition of assets that we found. That water meter in upper left-hand part of the slide is a solid brass meter with a stamp date of 1900 on it that was taken out of service 2 years ago. It is a thing of beauty, but it wasn't reading accurately, although many public works folks will argue that the older meters read better than the newer ones. So on the right-hand side at the top is a picture of the trending radio read meters. Okay, next slide. So when you decide to start your journey on asset management, here are just some observations or suggestions. Take your time and try to get it as right as you can, because the better the quality of information that goes into this asset management work, the better the product is that you're going to return on the other side. And so it is important for that reason. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Now there are so many more resources out there for asset management than when we first started. There are whole networks out there. So there is no reason to sit back with a problem and not ask for help. And most of the help is free. And then thirdly, and this is super important, is to communicate. Communicate what you're doing. Communicate what you're finding. It's a way to educate your users and your elected officials. Helping folks have the best information available to make the decisions that they're ultimately going to have to make, whether that's to raise rates, or if you're on the elected official side, or pay higher rates if you're on the consumer side. If you can provide information on what you know to be the problem and how you're working to address it, that is just vitally important. And then there are 3 samples of ways that we've encouraged folks to do it, through a newsletter, adding information to their websites, or putting an insert in your bills. If you do, I think most people do paper bills here in our region. Next slide. Here's some information, just brief screenshots of EPA, American Water Works Association, NATO, the Environmental Finance Centers, the Rural Water Associations. And those are just a few of the resources that are out there, but there are worksheets, there are policies, you know, there are just a lot more resources out there on asset management now than there were when we started. Next slide. And then finally, don't forget about your regional development organization. Don't forget about your COG. You know, it may be that your COG's elected board has decided that this is a priority, like ours did. Or if they haven't yet, maybe they will with some encouragement. But typically you can find resources available from your regional organization that would be very helpful in getting started in asset management and continuing your way forward. Next slide. This is a slide from our regional association of COGs. We have most states do have a state organization that the local regions are a part of. This is their website. Next slide. Okay, and that's me. So thank you for the opportunity to thank you, Brett, and I'll be available for questions.
Wonderful, Jean. Well, thank you so much for that really wonderful presentation, kind of sharing your asset management journey as an organization and the impacts that you're having on the community and some of those resources you use. So thank you so much. So you can see we're pushing overtime here. We had so many questions come through. We can only maybe get to a fraction of them, maybe 2 or 3, but hopefully you can follow up afterwards as well. So just Liz, if you want to hop on here as well, up onto our virtual stage. There was a couple of questions actually that came through to kind of consolidate them all here, but asking about, you know, small water systems that operate outside of municipalities or, you know, without an elected officials kind of structure. Can you talk about any experiences you might have with that? Do you feel that what you talked about today is replicable in those with those types of systems, or just kind of best practices for these very small, again, kind of outside of the jurisdictional boundaries?
I can speak up first because I think my answer is going to be shorter. That was definitely something I thought about putting my slides together. Was we have Morse Bluff, the village, but we also have Morse Bluff, the township, and we have unincorporated townships. And especially with floods, we've seen a lot of these areas need real support and resources, and it's very hard for us to find those for them. So I think in adapting a regional approach and building more of our own asset management capacity, we're hoping to be able to find funds that can impact the region, maybe through the EDA or other funding sources that we wouldn't normally be looking to.
Jean, any thoughts?
You know, most of the jurisdictions in North Carolina, the water systems are the public water systems that we address, at least, are operated by public entities. We do have many other public water systems that are not yet eligible for funding from some of the major programs, and that's probably something that we need to look at and work on going forward.
Great. Excellent. There were a couple of questions that came through about workforce development funds that, you know, both of your organizations kind of administer, and have you seen examples of them, you know, supporting, you know, water operator trainees, either through training or through covering wages, kind of on the workforce front with water operators? Any thoughts or examples?
In North Carolina, I believe that there is one organization that is currently doing a pilot program on trying to put together, you know, looking at public works service as they're great jobs. You know, they generally carry insurance. You know, they're people can build careers if they have them, but there is no pipeline in place to usher or encourage, high school graduates or community college graduates toward those types of jobs. And, one of the things that, we've looked at trying to do a pilot project on that ourselves, and then with the last hurricane, kind of set that aside. We haven't picked it back up again, but we probably should, because that is a legitimate way to combine workforce development funds and activities with water and wastewater management.
And Liz, any examples?
I'll add that in Nebraska, we have something that's called the League of Municipalities, Nebraska Municipalities. I use them every day because they create the little phone book of all the clerks that I need to reach out to, but they also coordinate water training for our region. I don't know if there's specific employer-led initiatives, but that is a resource that all clerks and communities are going to be connected to. And we have had CDBG funding and other funds at the state, especially recently, being directed towards more training initiatives. And I think one thing with a lot of our communities being rural, we've seen companies like Ranke, which is a national, probably international water irrigation company. They're situated down in Thayer County in a really tiny community of Deschler. These kids that grow up in that community get to go to a high school where they've already got a lot of experience, apprenticeships, internships that are very specific to building a career. And I think it would be very reasonable to think that our region would be able to pipeline some support for our local community colleges and schools to provide that resource.
Great. Well, getting the signal to wrap up soon. So just one quick question here about, there's a question I guess for Jean. Do you recommend having 2 asset management plans, one for drinking, one for wastewater, combine it? Kind of what do you think is, or how have you kind of approached that?
We have always worked on having them separate. I think that is advantageous because it gives you, especially if you're using asset management as a way to try to educate folks, whether that be elected leaders or users, it gives you a specific set of information about a specific set of assets. And then having a parallel, one there, one for water, one for wastewater. They're linked, but in terms of what they do functionally, they're pretty different. So we found it useful to have one for each.
Great. Well, listen, thank you, Liz and Jean, so much for this. Really wonderful stories and the work you do. And I think if folks weren't aware of the role that regional development organizations play in this space before this webinar, hopefully they do now as well. And we'll reach out and pick up the phone and make those connections to their RDO to help support on these variety of areas. So thanks to both of you. A lot of folks have stayed on way past the hour mark, so that's a very good sign of interest and support, so thank you for that. And let me just turn it back quickly to Savannah to wrap us up with some final housekeeping. So thanks again, everyone.
Thanks, Brett, and thank you all for sticking with us these few moments over 3 o'clock. I'm just going to send out one quick poll question. It is regarding technical assistance from the EFCN. We can provide some support on various topics from workforce development to asset management as discussed today. So just let us know here and, we'll make a reach out to get you some more information. And we'll get ready to close this poll in 3, 2, 1. And lastly, you will be receiving a follow-up email that gives you access to the PowerPoint, a video recording, and again, any other information that you might be interested in viewing from the EFCN or some of our presenters today. So again, thank you to the panel for taking time this afternoon to provide their expertise. And thank you all for joining us and have a great rest of the day.